세션을 다시 이어가도록 하겠습니다. 세 번째 발표는 UNDP DR 콩고 사무소 로렌 루다싱와 부대표님께서 발표를 해주시겠습니다. 부대표님께서는 르완다, 남아프리카, 부룬디, DR 콩고 등 되게 다양한 아프리카에 있는 국가에서 많은 활동을 해오셨고요. UNDP에서만 재직하신 지 지금 약 20년 정도 되셨습니다. 그래서 오늘 발표를 통해서 실제 아프리카 지역, 특히 분쟁 취약국이 많은데요. 분쟁 취약국에서는 그 취약성 해소가 이제 매우 평화 구축에서 매우 중요한데 취약성 해소를 어떻게 하고 있는지를 뉴딜 이행을 중심으로 소개를 주실 거고요. 그 다음에 그 뉴딜 이행과 함께 평화 지속화를 위해서 실질적으로 사업 방식 중에 하나로서 인도적 지원, 개발, 평화 활동가들 간의 넥서스 방식을 많이 활용을 하고 있는데요. 이거에 대해서 실질적으로 어떤 케이스로 운영을 했는지를 소개를 주시면서 지금 저희가 평화 지속화 논의하고 있는 이 내용이 어떻게 실제 사업으로 구현이 될 수 있는지에 대해서 임플리케이션을 주시겠습니다. 그럼 큰 박수로 맞아주시기 바랍니다.
Good afternoon again. I would like to thank the MC for giving again this floor to share concrete example of what is happening in DR Congo. So my presentation is in 5 points. I'm going to talk about the challenge of peace and development in DRC, and I will talk about the New Deal and planning process since 2001 to address the peace and development nexus. And thirdly, I'm going to talk a little bit about UNDP intervention. And if you allow me, I will call my good friend Richard de la Falaise, who is a good partner from MONUSCO, to talk about a concrete example, just for a few minutes, about what we call the International Stabilization and Stability, I4S. I think it's going to be interesting for you to understand what is happening, how concretely we are implementing stabilization. And I'm going to talk about, again, the nexus, and lastly, I will end with the opportunity and recommendation for future partnership. So, DRC, I will not go through the slides, but hopefully you can have a hard copy. So this is DRC, as I said before, 2.3 million square meters, almost 80 million of population. It's almost a continent, but with lots of issues. Let me try to divide them in three. The first political security humanitarian level. As you can see, the state authority is weak because of the proliferation of arms groups, especially in the eastern part of the country. Very close political space. We are going through election on 23rd of December, presidential, senatorial, and parliamentarian, but the quality of the election is a question mark. And as we are talking about sustaining peace, if we do not have a very good process of elections, meaning that we may relapse into conflict again. DRC is a country which is known with very good policy papers, very good, I can tell you. We have a non-finished decentralization process, but into the paper it's well written, right? Giving the power to the territory and to the district, because it's a huge country. So in terms of governance, it's better to rely on decentralization and make sure that we have something tangible. And of course, there's an absence of a balance of powers. On the economic, social, and human development level, of course, a lot of inequalities, unemployment is rampant, mass poverty, 63% of the population, and high inequalities, as I said before. And the economy is there, but not diversified. Environmental, you can see this big country has one of the biggest surface area of forest, but still deforestation and accelerated forest degradation is high. So on the right side of the slide, you're going to see a couple of figures that can give you a glimpse of what is happening in DRC. So I spoke about the recurrence of conflicts. So 18 out of 26 provinces are affected by conflict and humanitarian crisis. So rebel movement, IDPs, internally displaced persons. And now we have the epidemics such as cholera, we have the measles, we have the Ebola, which is currently killing people up north in DRC. And as you can see, the figure is really high. According to OCHA, the UN humanitarian organization, 13.1 million of Congolese are in need of humanitarian assistance, and among them 7.7 million children, and 14% of the total population. I wanted to put out those figures because the humanitarian situation is also being politicized in DRC. Although those figures have been put in place following a thoroughly and scientific data collection by the humanitarian community, there are still fights among the humanitarian community and the government about these figures. The government is not happy with those figures because it is being politicized. But we need it to implement humanitarian needs that are very in need. I spoke about the IDPs. I spoke about sexual gender-based violence. You have heard the recent Nobel Prize Professor Mukwege. He's a very well-renowned professor who is based in Eastern Congo. He's doing a great job in terms of assisting women affected by sexual gender-based violence. And there are a couple of actions that have been implemented by the UN community that have reduced the number of victims, but we still have a long way to go. I spoke about the epidemics. They are there: yellow fever, Ebola, sleeping sickness, measles, cholera, etc. So those are the issues. Now, with that context, which of course we have positive side of DRC, it's a wealthy country, etc., but we have challenges that need to be addressed. So that's why I want to talk about the New Deal in sustaining peace. We're talking about SG 16. Let me read this small sentence. It's very important that we provide assistance and services to everyone, but if we don't also work upstream, we will never get at the root causes. So I'm here to talk about the operationalization of the nexus through the New Deal as a tool for fragility assessment. The presentation will be in two levels. The first level, we're going to talk about the upstream level, the planning process. You cannot talk about nexus without starting by the planning, making sure that the planning process takes into account the nexus between humanitarian and development. So what is the New Deal? As I said before, it's an upstream tool which is suggested, agreed by self-declared fragile countries, what we normally call the G7+, which was agreed in Busan 2011, to get engaged in addressing the root causes of conflict-affected and fragile situation. It's an entry point where people's voices need to be heard. So basically, the affected community need to be consulted so that they can give their point of view during the planning process. It has to be a participatory manner. The New Deal is also a platform where international and national partners talk, a partner to support the national provincial development planning process. It's a tool for monitoring the progress of 5 indicators for transition out of fragility. Let me come to the real situation of DRC. In DRC, we as UNDP, we strategically choose the New Deal fragility assessment as an entry point for upstream planning process. Because we do believe that through the participatory methods where we consult with the population from the grassroots, it's like a bottom-up process whereby we make sure that the diagnoses that have been done there fit in the planning process. I will come back to that and see the concrete result that we have come with. So I wanted to show you the different phases of planning process in DRC. You can see the PRSP1 between 2002 to 2005, where it was about stabilization, transition, and construction. And we have from 2006 to 2010, where it was about governance and poor growth recovery with a 5 pillar, where you can see. And from 2011 to 2016, where it was about growth, job creation, and the climate change impact. You're going to ask yourself, we have all these plans, but yet the country is still lagging behind. What is not going on well? By talking about the upstream support using the New Deal fragility assessment, which is a bottom-up approach, I'm proud to say that so far we managed to help the government of DRC through the Minister of Planning to come up with a national strategy for development. You can see the PNSD in French, the Plan National Stratégique de Développement. It's the national development strategy for the period of 2019 to 2024. Let me take time to explain a bit how we came up with this process, because I think it's a best case example that can be applicable if we want to do really, if you want to think about the vision of sustaining peace, upstream level. UNDP was mandated to help countries to accelerate the implementation of the SDGs, the 17 SDGs. But you believe with me that 17 SDG this is the goal for the Agenda 2030, but they have to be tailored to the country specificity. How we did in DRC? Complex country, huge opportunity, huge challenges. The first step was to put in place a team of experts from the Ministry of Planning. We created an institution which was a kind of observatory for SDG implementation, building a critical mass of experts that can go onto the 26 provinces together with the other partner, not only to do the fragility assessment, but come up with the data that could fit in the design of the national strategic plan. Today, I can be happy to tell you that the draft of that document is almost ready. And this document is really a pro-SDG document. Among the 17 SDGs, we came up with 34 SDG targets. It was a debate, workshops, and around 52 indicators at national level. But the document is not yet been approved by the government, but it's going through the processes, through the parliament to be approved. But as you know, we are going through election on the 33rd of December. So the political environment is refraining the approval process. And we are hearing that the new government, which will come from the election, may use that document as a manifesto for the coming 5 years. So for us, we say this is a success story. So, but now the challenge, I told you DRC is 26 provinces, 2.3 million square meters. So how this national plan can be implemented and really being a tool for provincial and territorial district planning processes, which are SDG prone. But before going that, let me just show you the pillar that constitute the national planning in DRC. We have 5: governance and peace building, diversification and economic transformation, infrastructure development, and modernization, social and human resource development, and environment, sustainable development, and balanced provincial development. So, let me move to the concrete example of the I4S. I will come back maybe later for the discussion. That's why I want to ask my good friend Richard to come talk quickly about the I4S, because this is a real concrete example on how we did operationalization of stabilization with the clear funding mechanism. Richard, if you come please.
Okay. Thank you very much, Laurent, for sharing the word with me. First of all, thank you for COICA for inviting us today. Laurent from Kinshasa and me from Goma in Eastern DRC. First of all, just to set a few, if COICA does not mind, if I ask for just a few points to, I'd like to speak on the Chatham House rule. It will be easier for me. And just to set the scene, Laurent works for UNDP, and I work for MONUSCO, which is the peacekeeping operation based in Eastern DRC. And the peacekeeping operation is a rather political operation where UNDP, like any other agencies, are more in the support of a member state. This is why I would prefer to speak on the Chatham House rule, please. Going back to, I don't know how it works really well, but yeah, going back a bit, I like the figures that are being all the time showed about Congo. I'd like to set the scene about something else. This is it. You see all these figures and this misery in DRC, but I'd like also to highlight another issue about Congo. It is the second largest country on the African continent. And the paradigm, or the irony of the story, it's a rich country. It's not a poor country. It's a country that exports gold, coltan, and many other minerals worldwide. And some of these, because we need them, how does this work? We need them for our economies. So we can't really, what I would like to put as a scene is you have in a rich country, in Eastern DRC, at the minimum 40 armed groups still operating, okay, minimum. The research center at New York University will put the figure around 80. Our own analyst will go probably above that. But at least we put the bar at 40 armed groups. So in 2018, we're still running 40 armed groups in Eastern DRC. And the question is, why? The Security Council has mandated MONUSCO to address armed groups in Eastern DRC, which is the last location where we have conflicts. The rest, it's well explained by Laurent. In 2008 and 2012, we implemented the first stabilization strategy as part of a peacekeeping operation, known as the International Security and Stabilization Support Strategy. This strategy, what we learned from that strategy is very simple. For too long, we have been operating that's on the basis that technical responses can bring solutions to problems. You can train civil servants, you can build buildings, you can provide police stations, courts, etc. Road constructions if you want. This was done from 2008 to 2012 for a budget of $367 million by international donors. And at the end, after 4 years, you had zero reduction of armed groups in Eastern DRC. So the lessons learned from this was, as requested by the Security Council, United Nations, MONUSCO, go back to the drawing board and come up with something else. What we did in 2012 and 2013 is we revised the I4S. And first what we decided to look at are the root causes and the conflict dynamics in Eastern DRC. What makes conflicts happen in Eastern DRC and what makes them continuing? If we're actually going to go through this presentation with a few key words, you will see that many words were presented by Mr. David Stephen earlier. And therefore, we're now bringing down this presentation at a more local level down to the ground. Security dilemma. If you're from an ethnic group and you don't feel safe, you're going to raise your own defense system in order to protect yourself. It's natural. The mobilization around land and identity. Most peacekeeping operations in the world linked to land and identity. What land you control, your identity is protected. From the Balkans in Europe to Palestine to Eastern DRC. Regional dynamics. There is one member state, which I cannot name, next door to Congo, exports gold. And they have no gold mine. It has to come from somewhere. Exploitation of natural resources or mis-exploitations, where basically you're running mines, they're out of control by the government, or they're controlled by elements of the government, or by the armed forces, but it's not going in the right direction when it comes to income. So once we've understood that, the root causes and conflict dynamics, and we decided to go back to the drawing board and see what kind of strategy we want. Very important word is the first word on top of each of the four sides, patrimonialism. I would call it state predator. We can go back into this word. As I explained, we therefore came up with the conclusion that we have to stop on technical responses. They can provide support when we need them, but they are not going to be the starting base. The one-size-fits-all, which I've been part for 18 years in peacekeeping, where we decide in New York what is good, all the way from New York via Liberia to Seoul, is not the case. Every location needs its own intervention. And therefore, United Nations Security Council Resolution 2053 adopted the concept of stabilization, which is multidimensional, building bottom-up, the role of communities. They will decide on their stabilization. It's not what we call in Congolese the Muzungu, the white people who are going to come and put the solution on the ground. They will drive the stabilization. And top-down is the authorities who will take actions to provide adequate governance. I will pass this because I have a gentleman telling me I have 2 minutes left. This is what the I4S look like. What we did, we basically put together 5 pillars that are often kept apart from each other. The democratic dialogue at the bottom is what the population use with the assistance of specific NGOs to drive the stabilization, to decide which way they want to go. We need the security. That means we need the armed forces and the police to be more acceptable to the population, so they have to stop harassing them. We need the restoration of state authority. These are all the services the state is supposed to provide. And the triple R is basically the economic pillar of the I4S. And we have mainstream women, peace and security agenda across the other 4 pillars. And therefore you have what we call in 3 words, holistic, coordinated and targeted approach to the system, to a conflict. The way we operationalize this is we have created a stabilization coherence fund, bringing a number of donors together so we could target each conflict area. Based on the conflict analysis, I'd like to put a strong emphasis on that. We have commissioned conflict analysis to understand what was behind those conflicts, who were pulling the strings in Kinshasa, for example. A number of donors have then aligned their interventions along the I4S and direct support to MONUSCO with other staff or funding. Contribution will pass on that for the moment. And then we have the trust fund, and that's it for us. So I'll stop. I'll put it there for you for the next. So the stabilization is really not a development strategy, it's a political intervention. Thank you.
Thank you, Richard. Actually, I wanted to hook him up to the presentation just to show how we work together as MONUSCO, but as UNDP also, one of our core mandates stabilization. And I think there are some very good examples in terms of conflict analysis, which look like the fragility assessment that we are doing through the Nexus. But most important here is that we have 2 funding mechanisms that are really working well. And since we are moving towards the Nexus, we're trying to see these 2 funding systems, how they can, this positive side of this funding mechanism can build into the implementation of the Nexus, because we're talking about the Nexus here. So maybe quickly, let me talk about you are all maybe familiar with OCHA, which is a UN body dealing with humanitarian. OCHA has more or less 70 million budget a year through what we call the humanitarian response plan, and its intervention are more or less life savings, especially on conflict-prone area. So UNDP is playing a role as a funding agent for the humanitarian side. So the humanitarian fund is a trust fund which is managed by UNDP, but we work with a green light from the humanitarian coordinator, who is at the same time the resident coordinator, where project and activity are funded through a very well experienced clusters where needs are assessed and implemented. So, talking about the UNDP intervention, following its strategic plan, we had two priority axes to meet peace and development in DRC. The first one, the three guiding principles for the intervention. So, one, it was allowing the transition for humanitarian aid to peace building in order to strengthen the rule of law over the long term. Secondly, ensuring better spatial and sectoral balance in programming. And thirdly, obligation of medium and long-term results. So these are the intervention in brief. So with two axes that you can see here. Someone was, during the break, someone was asking me about the election. You can see how we support the electoral cycle. We are strong in justice and rule of law, you know. We are also working on local and democratic governance. On the second axis, about the inclusive growth and sustainable development, we support the development which is SDG-based. And of course, in terms of sustainable livelihood and energy, we have two activities focusing on recovery and development of renewable energy. And finally, you can see under the axis 2, sustainable management of natural resources and fight against climate change. I will not go into details. You can see the continuity of our activity. But in my presentation, I told you about our upstream support through a comprehensive package, which is the SDG focused, talking about, first of all, prioritization. From 17, we narrowed it to well-tailored SDGs that are appropriate to to Congo context. And as I will speak today, we have moved from the national planning process, and now we have teams that have hit the ground working on now provincial development plan. The beauty of this is that we're going to go further down and come up with a provincial action plan, which we will be fully owned by the government. So the downstream level, as I told you, we're talking about the restoration of state authority. We're talking about the community governance and capacity building of local actors, and we're talking about stabilization, livelihood, and access to opportunities in area of returns. Now, I think the main subject here is how the humanitarian and development plan nexus is implemented. What is the rationale of an integrated approach to nexus-based intervention in conflict area? I spoke about the better articulation between the humanitarian aid and development assistance so as to put the first in a sustainable perspective, trying to reduce long-term humanitarian needs by making best use of existing resources and capacity. Let me come back to this second point. In my speech at the beginning of this session, I was saying that DRC have been in humanitarian situation since 20 years. So in terms of structural transformation, or lifting up the community out of poverty, or giving them enough capacity not to be hit by those repetitive crises. What should they do? So that's why we need to think about it. So reducing the long-term humanitarian needs, it can be done. And it's very important to coordinate our action across the continuum to generate efficiency and effectiveness to achieve improved and highly collective results. So when we conduct this upstream fragility assessment, coming out with a diagnosis, we make sure that there's a consensus around this bottom-up approach. Because with the community where we do data collection, down there to the district, we make sure that these are the real needs of the community. But we need to come up to the Kinshasa level, making sure that there's a common understanding on the needs. And as I told you, in terms of the concrete results, we have a national planning document that is ready to be approved by the government. But we still have a long way to go in terms of coming up with a provincial national development plan and, of course, the provincial plans. So it's important also to build partnership, especially with the private sector. We believe in private sector, local actor, the banks, who can provide additional capacity. See, the private sector is more and more consulted because we know they are geared towards profit. But by being geared towards profit, they can also bring some additional value in terms of lifting up the needed community out of poverty. So what is the approach, the modality for operationalization of the Nexus humanitarian development in the context of DRC? The new way of working analytical framework calls on the actors to make commitment and design effective practical modality for successful implementation of the Nexus. So within the UN system, we have commissioned a study where there's an advisory support within the office of the UN resident coordinator to come up with a framework where all the UN system can work together and move from humanitarian to development. And the arrangements are in place and are almost in the making and will gear towards our planning processes. So let me quickly talk about the declination of the implementation phasing of the Nexus, because we need to identify Nexus pilot provinces. One, as I told you, we are currently conducting a holistic needs assessment using the bottom-up approach, conducting a multi-year planning program, which will come from the diagnosis, which reflect the real need of the community, and most importantly, define expected collective results. Because to have collective results, it has to be an inclusive process where everyone is involved. And of course, building on concrete, well-functional coordination mechanism. We spoke about the I4S, the funding mechanism, to make it happen, because we need to move out from papers to real action into the field. And establish a predictable, flexible, and multi-year funding mechanism. It's extremely important. We know we still have a long way to go, but we are still struggling to make this happening. So some consensual points of entry for the Nexus in the DRC. As I told you, we're proud to say that at least the National Strategic Development Plan and the Provincial Development Plan, including the Provincial Action Plan, will be the key document. You see, the beauty of these three documents, the PNSD, the Provincial Development Plan, the action plans, those are government-owned documents. Let me emphasize on this point. You see, sometimes we donors, we have a tendency of sitting in our office and draw or design plans without consulting. But in the DRC context, despite all the challenges that we are having, the Minister of Planning, the National Minister of Planning, himself is piloting the process of designing. And the document is ready, and as I told you before, we're just waiting for the election to happen in December, in the 23rd of December, hopefully, to really now start the implementation of the document. But of course, this has to go through a round table. And I'm proud to say that this document is pro-SDG document, where we tried to narrow down the SDGs, the target. Now we are at 32 targets and 54 indicators that are consensual and that will trickle down to the provincial needs. So, decentralization. As I told you, DRC is good at drawing nice policy documents, but the implementation is still a problem. It's a theme. Again, DRC is a huge country. It's a theme which all actors agree, but for which the Nexus pilot can be easily established. I'm talking about Nexus pilot. For now, we have 4 provinces in Eastern Congo, conflict-prone. Why conflict-prone? Because to showcase the real impact in terms of sustaining peace, the UN system, the UNDP, decided to start the North, South Kivu, Tanganyika, and Maniema, which are conflict-prone provinces, and maybe Kasai Central, where we have a rampant conflict currently. So those 5 provinces will constitute our key focus for the planning using the Nexus and using the SDG domestication localization. So what is our position as UNDP? UNDP is a key player in the development process. This is our DNA. We work with spectrum of the Nexus from stabilization to recovery, development, and peace building. The new UNDP strategic plan asks us to be integrator, conveyor, working with the other sister agencies, the donor community, bilaterals, to make sure that the Agenda 2030 is being implemented. So based on the comparative advantage and acquired experience in that domain, we strategically position ourselves in various niches. As I told you, in terms of stabilization, North, South Kivu, that's where my good friend Rishai is based in Goma. Talking about stabilization, Ituri, South Kivu, and North Kivu. Development, the durable solution, talking about the SDGs, and peace, because we're talking about 1.7 internal displaced people that need to be addressed. We are talking about refugees, which are in huge numbers. Now, let me talk about the subject which is up to date. MONUSCO is a huge machine, which is about maybe to start drawing down and leave the space to the other UN bodies. That's why I'm going to talk about the transition of the stabilization from MONUSCO to the UNCT. UNCT is a UN country team. To do so, we need enhanced partnership with donors within the framework of the Nexus. One, it will be important to put in place a financing mechanism to allow the Nexus to happen, to allow the new wave of working to happen. And for the diverse partnership, so that we can capitalize on the existing one. So I was telling about 2 models that are working on the humanitarian side and on the stabilization side. I think those are examples that need to be capitalized and help the Nexus to happen. In my speech, I was saying that COICA is a key bilateral partner with whom we are having a couple of activities in DRC. So we could see how we can mobilize COICA in terms of operationalizing the SDP Nexus through entry point. We have some key thematic focus, I spoke about them: sustaining peace, recovery of affected community, and stabilization. there's a need for complementary transition long-term intervention that build on existing humanitarian intervention to address underlying cause of conflict. We have some expertise and knowledge exchange. Example, we have had a chance to have some KMCO experts that came to DRC. One of them is my good friend, Mr. Park, and who is today managing one of the successful program on the New Deal. And that's it. So you will have the opportunity to ask questions because my friends will come up front, and feel free to ask any question. We are here to share a concrete example from the field. I thank you again.
네, 루다싱화 부대표님의 발표, 긴 발표 감사드리고요. 말씀 주신 것처럼 실제로 이걸 이행을 할 때는 HDP 넥서스를 소개를 주셨어요. 분쟁을 해결하기 위해서는 사실상 실질적으로 인도적 지원과 개발이 어떻게 이거를 타이밍을 잘 맞춰서 하나의 목표를 가지고 나아가는지가 매우 중요한데요. 거기서도 코이카의 이제 역할을 어떻게 할 수 있을지도 약간 많은 시사점을 주셔서 감사하고, 여기서도 이제 느끼셨겠지만 사실 현장에서 분쟁 취합국 같은 경우에는 현장에서 활동이 중요한데 거기서 특히 NGO의 활동이 매우 중요합니다. 그래서 저희가 NGO도 주요 활동가로서 항상 고려를 하고 있는데요. 네 번째 발표는 서울사이버대학교 공구순 교수님께서 여기에 포커스를 맞춰서 소개를 주시겠습니다. 공규순 교수님께서는 인도적 지원 활동 및 평화 유지, 평화 구축 활동과 관련해서 많은 연구를 해오셨고요. 많은 다양한 자문 활동도 해오신 바 있습니다. 그래서 오늘 마지막 발표에서는 현재 국제사회에서 활발히 일어나고 있는 평화 구축 및 평화 지속화 의제에 관련해서 이게 주요하게 무슨 내용인지를 다시 한번 정리해 주시고요. 이와 함께 시민사회는 이런 아젠다, 의제를 어떻게 바라보고 있는지 말씀을 주시고, 그리고 시민사회에게 기대되는 역할은 앞으로 무엇일지에 대해서 종합적으로 말씀 주시겠습니다. 큰 박수로 맞아주시기 바랍니다.
Thank you for kind introduction. Good afternoon, distinguished participants. My name is Gu-Sun Kwon, teaching at Seoul Cyber University. I'd like to express my sincere gratitude to KOICA for inviting me this meaningful occasion. Actually, this forum is very special to me because I submitted a proposal of this type of peace building forum to KOICA last June. Then I forgot. Then I got a call from KOICA 3.5 weeks ago, and this peace building forum was scheduled and asked me to make a presentation of civil society roles in peace building and sustaining peace. Then I said yes, but the problem is time constraint. So my presentation might be kind of introduction of concept of peace building and some general guideline or the concept of civil society roles for peace building process, particularly learn from lessons my field experience in Liberia. The good thing of last speaker is previous excellent speakers covers many parts of my presentation, so I skip some part of my slide. Okay, my presentation has 5 parts: introduction and evolution of UN peace agenda and civil society organizations, and civil society organizations' role in the peace building process, and what this kind of process imply to Korean civil society. Then the conclusion. After Second World War, UN intergovernmental organizations and nation states were main actors to maintain international peace and security. Taking public actors' dominance into account, civil society was perceived as an unnecessary or marginalized actor in interstate armed conflict. However, as you see, the graph of the armed conflict from 1947 up to now, So armed conflict of intrastate armed conflict has been increasing, reached almost 50 armed conflict in 1990 when the Iron Curtain was collapsed. And also the second, the graph shows the recipient country of consolidated process issued by UN OCHA. Then the 2016 UN OCHA cap amount almost 23.5 billion US dollar. I think DRC one of the top list of the recipient country of cap process. So that amount is almost 400% more than that of 2006. It's a 400% increase. That means still armed conflict and human casualties is still increasing past 10 years. So questions, we may have questions, which actors and approaches are most effective in ending conflict and building peace? Many researchers and commentators argue that no single actor can resolve this armed conflict and build peace. So participation of multi-actors and ranging from United Nations to grassroots organizations or civil society in the parties to conflict countries can lead to the lasting peace. So many INGOs and civil society organizations were called on kind of external pressure of donor countries and donor agencies. Also, many INGOs redefine their mandate to involve this peace building or from humanitarian assistance to the development. So those INGOs and CSOs have actively participated in activities of peace building. So the additional questions are, by what mandate should CSOs commit to accomplish in conflict-stricken countries or societies? How is the peace-building activities of external, INGOs and local CSOs considered and assessed in the nexus of peace and development? So as you see this diagram, we cannot explain the peace agenda of the United Nations without understanding of peace operation or peacekeeping. So in first stage, actually they argued and criticized by the international community during the Iron Curtain. United Nations was unable to manage conflict, particularly interstate conflict. So as an alternative approach, UN adopted alternative approach of peacekeeping to monitor and observe the warring parties. So it started observer mission and interposition mission between 1948 to 1956. During this period, 3-star or 2-star general officer took responsibility for the mission as a force commander or a chief military observer. But since 1990 or late 1980s, actually context of armed conflict has been changing from interstate armed conflict to intrastate armed conflict, because one of the principles of UN peacekeeping mission is the consent to host countries, but intrastate conflict is difficult to get specific concrete consent to nation state, host country. So the trend of armed conflict has been changing. Then peacekeeping mission also has been changing from traditional peacekeeping like observing or monitoring of ceasefire to multidimensional peacekeeping operation starting 1989 to up to now. So during this period, actually the high-ranking diplomat or UN officer took over head of the mission, and many components, including military, UN police or civilian police, and civilian experts get together as a team, as a UN mission. Also, UNDP, actually resident coordinator, was assigned to new head of Deputy Secretary General of Deputy Special Representative of Secretary General. So development and the UN mission combined as a one team to interact, to develop or build peace in the conflict country. So peace building should be understood as a process, not as a part of the peace operation. So the problem of the conflict, the kind of absence of peace, should go to and should move to peace as a goal. To build a peace, so peace building can be understood as a process of building peace in order to eradicate the root causes of conflict and also eradication of structural violences. So actually conceptualization of peace building was started, the report of the Boutros-Ghali in 1992, Agenda for Peace. So Boutros-Ghali's report divided three different types of the peace operation. The first, peacemaking, is action to bring hostile parties to agreement, essentially through such peaceful means as those foreseen in Chapter 6, kind of peaceful settlement. The peacekeeping is as usual, and post-conflict peace building is action to identify and support structures which will tend to strengthen and solidify peace in order to avoid relapse into conflict. So main concept of peace building in this paper is kind of limited to post-conflict. So that is constrained to post-conflict because that concept is quite relevant to member states because they don't want to be intervened before the crisis. So that's the main concept of peace building in 1992. But as you know, in 1994, the Somalia and Rwanda, in 1998, the Kosovo cases actually showed the failure of UN peacekeeping. That actually call upon to UN Security Council to change and reframe of the peacekeeping or peace operations. So that goes to Secretary General to request some special the panel on United Nations and peace operation. We call the Brahimi report, which was released in 2000. So in this report, UN peace operation entails the three principal activities: conflict prevention and peacemaking, peacekeeping, and peace building. So in this report, that report started to highlight conflict prevention and peace building. So long-term conflict prevention addresses the structural sources of conflict in order to build a solid foundation for peace. And peace building also redefined activity undertaken on the far side of a conflict to reassemble the foundations of peace and provide the tools for building on those foundations, something that is more than just absence of war. So this is more goes to and move to positive peace to eradicate the root causes of the conflict. Oh, I forgot to mention that, as you know, MDG was started in 2000, but there are still kind of glass wall between MDG and kind of peace agenda. So there has there is no any substantial interaction between development and peace operation. But in interface between peace and development, we can see the 2015 the momentum of the development initiative SDG 16 actually point out that peace and peace, justice, and strong institution. In parallel with these SDG 16 goals, peace operation part released a new report. It's a high-level independent panel on peace operation we call HIPPO report. They claimed uniting our strength for peace, politics, partnership, and people. As you see, the four essential shifts: politics-driven, flexibly responded, but we can see many similar type of words in development like partnership and people centers were coined in this report. So also it highlights the 4 approaches to conflict prevention and protection of civilians. So when I was asked to some special lecturer to our Korea National Defense University of Peacekeeping Operations Center, because main faculty of that university is military officers or retired military officers. They are not very familiar with the protection of civilian in their operations. So I was asked to how protection of civilian can be implemented in peace operation. So it's kind of interaction occurred, started between development and peace actors. Finally, Antonio Guterres, current Secretary General, released a report on peace building and sustaining peace. And if I summarize his report, first is he actually elevates the role of civil society, including women's and youth groups. The second is the joint assessment, planning, and programming, which is covered by previous speakers. And third, more predictable and sustainable financing for civilian-led peace building. The fourth is a report to stress upon the UN development system and development practitioners in general are central to conflict prevention and sustaining peace. This is a kind of the good evidence that how the development actor can intervene and participate in the peace building and prevention and sustaining peace. So in the series of these the papers released by UN Security Council and some special panel, in 1992 Agenda for Peace, they address civil society one of the partner of peacekeeping operations. In 2000, Brahmi report stated that maintain partnership with civil society and NGOs. 2015 HIPPO report labeled civil society as a main actor to create strong momentum for spread of democracy and human rights across the globe. Finally, 2008 report highlight role of civil society, including women's and youth groups. So in the chronologically perspective, it's kind of peace operation and Security Council take very serious about role of civil society in the peace building process. So this is a stereotype of the diagram show kind of peace operations and face of peace operations. Deterrence and conflict, war, ceasefire, and political process. This is a stereotype of the face of peace operation. So if you see the prevention is before conflict to take place, then during the war, the peacemaking and sometimes robust peacekeeping that mobilize armed forces to protect the civilians or sometimes engage warring parties. But after ceasefire, the peacekeeping and peacebuilding started. That is the stereotype concept of peace operation. But nowadays, we changed the concept of peace building should not started after the crisis. The peace building is kind of the process from the beginning. The deter the conflict. Then whole process the peace building should be adapted and whole spectrum of the conflict. So dimension of peace building, many our previous speakers mentioned the many different part of or dimension of peace building. So we can say the governance and political rule of law, security and socio-economic economic recovery can be one. It's kind of interacted and interrelated component and dimension. So those 4 factors are mutually reinforcing, not mutually exclusive. It should be combined as one effort. So democratic governance covered the constitutional process, electoral assistance, political party development, mediation, and support civil society. In terms of rule of law part, justice and judicial and legal reform and criminal justice, police and correction reform, and transitional justice. How about socio-economic development? Is employment generation, natural resources management, private sector, industrial development, and public works and development. Security is really important in this component. Disarmament and demobilization and reintegration of the ex-combatants. Security sector reform, Ministry of National Defense, police, correction, border control. All the security actors must be reframed pertaining to the humanitarian security sector reform, the community violence reduction, and mine action. So what is roles of civil society for peace building? There are some different perspective of role of civil society in terms of democratization. Actually, function model indicate that protection, intermediation between state and citizens, and participatory socialization, and community building and integration, and communication. The role model show more broad sense, civil society as associational life, as a good society at the public sphere. But civil society in development cooperation is a bit different from kind of traditional civil society, because they are assigned to provide direct service. Their arguments always arise. Some conservative civil society academics claim that development cooperation civil society is not actually civil society, because their role is the subcontract of the development agencies or donor countries. But anyhow, the civil society in development cooperation also play some other roles, such as advocacy and monitoring. But armed conflict usually deteriorate the enabling environment of civil society, which generally cause a decline of civil society activity and make a revival difficult afterward. So local civil societies or external civil society should work together to revive the civil society after the armed conflict. So reframe those roles of civil society. We can reframe some mandates of civil society. So protection. Protection is against attacks from armed actors. That doesn't mean, or that doesn't necessarily means to use of force to protect civilians. Maybe monitoring and observation or association or mobilization to end the conflict or the violence to the civilians. And monitoring and early warnings, monitoring and controlling state activities and citizens' right for early warning. And advocacy and public communication, and culture of peace and socialization, and conflict-sensitive social cohesion, and intermediation, facilitation, and service delivery. So these combined roles of civil society were necessary to promote peace building in post-conflict or even before the conflict. This is a photo taken in my field activity in Liberia in 2010. This is I'm sorry. So monitoring and early warning through the monitoring visit and stakeholders interview. This is the entry point of the national natural park. This natural park is big problem for the ex-combatants to get into this natural park to illegal mining of gold and other natural resources. But it's so difficult to get into the center of the natural park. So we periodically visit this entry point of the park to monitor the situation and interview with the community leaders and peoples. And this is rubber plantation places. There are some reports from the other sources that Chinese company merged this rubber plantation, but they exploit laborers. They didn't commit their committed services to the workers in the area. So we monitor the situation, because sometimes misjudgment triggered a serious conflict. So we have to observe the situation as objective and fair manner. Also, community leaders and government officers also is a very important stakeholder to monitor the circumstance. So advocacy and public information through the Peace March or Wihan for You event. So regularly, many civil society participate in the special campaign and advocacy, especially for women and youth and children. So we actually observe we participate in their march campaign and also women's campaign and youth mobilization campaign. So this is quite important for a stakeholder of the community to get together to understand some reduce gap of understanding. Sometimes sports and cultural event is a very good instrument to share their ideas and also reduce the gap of understanding. We actually was invited to a sports event, the soccer game of the final. It's a youth match of the soccer. But the problem was that the hosting NGO is not a mistake, but they prepared some gift box to first winner is a bit small one, but the second winner is a big box. I don't know what actually inside the box, but the winner complained why our box is smaller than the second winner's box. So this is a kind of conflict sensitiveness. This is nothing in normal situation, but this is sometimes can the attribute to misjudgment of the situation. And this is a kind of the cultural event of a song festival of a younger generation to enjoy themselves and show performance. And conflict-sensitive social cohesion. This is a peace-building seminar organized by the UN mission and in cooperation with the civil society organization. So, and this period is 2010, is 7 years had passed since peace agreement was made. Usually 5 to 7 years is a critical period, whether the relapse to conflict or the lay foundation to lasting peace. So I observed this peace-building dialogue, but I realized that still the leaders community kept their hatred against the other part of the other ethnic group of the village. So they actually confessed their hatred, and still they keep in mind that the loss of their families. So this is a very important moment that they could understand what other community leaders think about themselves. So actually, civil society organizations play a very important or catalyst role in organizing this kind of peace-building dialogue. This mediation facilitation through observation and consultation. I was invited to observe kind of the gathering of regional CSO, the forum. But actually, after this forum, there were some election of the regional chapter representative and officers. So before the election was started, I had still DNA of CSO. So I proposed that all the members of the CSO, why don't we give at least 2 seats of officers to women? So it caused some little tension on the participant, but they actually discussed it's really necessary to give 2 seats to the women. Is it really necessary then? And then finally, the mediation was succeeded. So as you see, this is the this is a list of the position that 2 seats actually went to the women's group leader. The service delivery is the delivery of vaccination, also some examination and road brushing project. So this kind of works also can be the civil society organization can be part of this kind of service delivery initiative. But the challenge is external CSOs, particularly INGOs, many researchers criticize or argue that negative or non-impact from external civil society organizations' intervention because they didn't understand the full context of the society, because sometimes they misjudge the circumstances. As our previous speaker mentioned, is every conflict has their context and their own circumstances. So this misjudgment of universalization of conflict is really dangerous. But many INGOs in initial period, they made a big mistake of the misjudge of context in conflict area. And also mismatch between short-term and medium and long-term goal. Actually, many NGOs pursue their projective according to the funding scheme. So 3 years funding scheme can only plan the 3 years. It's quite limited. So I'd like to ask COICA if they intervene the peace building project, maybe they have to see at least more than 5 to 10 years for the funding scheme. The local NGOs, usually elite group took a position of CSO in urban area, but their representation and asymmetric resource mobilization, all the resources go to the elite CSOs, but their representation is limited because many rural areas didn't know about funding and didn't know about CSO activities done in the urban area. That is gap of resource mobilization. So Korea civil society and accountability for peace building. You know, Korean civil society started actually take the lead in our democratization since 1980s. Some scholars in Korea defined the evolution of Korean civil society started from 1980s, mobilization civil society. Our civil society succeeded in mobilizing huge and mass of our citizens to confront authoritarian government and regime. Then 1980s, our civil society was institutionalized, and their activity were quite diverse from environmental protection to human rights. But now we changed the nomadic civil society. So our development organization, our civil society in development cooperation started almost 1990s in transition from our donor as a donor country to recipient country to donor country. There are many NGOs who were established during 1980s. But Korea civil society and development cooperation have kept on a political stance in political issue in developing country because they more focus on delivery of service. If they confront the developing country's government, then they might have trouble in implementing their projects. So mainly our Korean NGOs took a political stance in their project area. So according to KCOC's report in 2017, humanitarian and developmental NGOs implemented only 2 SDGs 16 related projects, which is conflict, peace, and security. That is only 0.1% of the whole budget. However, COICA has pledged 13 projects related to peace and 17 to human rights and 85 to democratic governance since the first quarter of 2017. And so question is, who will take the lead in peace building? I mean, international or global peace building. Actually, COICA prioritized peace, human rights, democracy, and gender equality as one of their strategies. The focused on initiative of SDG 16 in development cooperation. The Commission's a series of researches on implementing strategy of SDG 16. So what about civil society? this initiative was already dominated by KOICA. So I'd like to ask a question to civil society organization in Korea. What will you do next 5 to 10 years? So I think civil society reduces the gap of capability between democracy, advocacy, CSOs, and humanitarian developmental NGOs. There are big gap between our development NGOs and our mainstream of democracy and advocacy civil society organizations. And what about establishing a new platform of solidarity for SDG 16 or add a new mission to current CSO networks such as SDG CitizenNet or Korea CS Forum on International Development Cooperation, we call COPIT. And also we need to raise awareness of peace building and build a relevant capacity. So my conclusion and recommendation is peace building and sustaining peace is not only an issue of the Korean Peninsula, but also a global agenda to achieve SDGs. Korean civil society has cultivated a well-known legacy of peace and democratization since the 1980s, which would be a valuable asset to be shared and disseminated with the civil society in conflicted society in developing countries. Also, innovative partnership and or the solidarity between advocacy and CSOs and NGOs should be considered so that synergy of both competence could be mobilized. And also, Korean government has to make an enabling environment for CSOs and NGOs to enter into implementation SDG 16 with the opportunity of a consortium-based program. So I want to share my last comments on interview of Yonbi Tona, Professor Yonbi Tona, who is a refugee of DRC. Now he's teaching at Gwangju University. Actually, he observed our candle peaceful movements in Gwanghwamun a couple of times. He said, if this kind of candle movement takes place in our country, DRC, our country will be changed. That's really challenge our civil society organization. What should we do next 5 to 10 years? Thank you.
네, 권기순 교수님의 마지막 발표 감사드립니다. 오늘 발표에서 확인하신 바와 같이 평화와 관련해서 이렇게 주요한 개념들과 히스토리가 있었다는 것도 많이 확인하실 수 있었을 것 같고요. 그리고 정말 제대로 된 평화 지속화 사업을 위해서는 다개념 펀딩과 사업이 운영이 필요하고 그리고 국제기구라든지 저희 코이카와 같은 개발기구 그리고 NGO, 기업 등 다양한 주체들 간의 파트너십이 얼마나 중요한지 다시 한번 확인할 수 있는 자리였다고 생각을 합니다. 그러면 저희 지금부터 좀 시간이 얼마 남지 않아서 5시 10분까지 저희 위에 여기 토론장 세팅이 되는 동안 5시 10분까지 잠깐 브레이크 타임 갖고요. 그리고 바로 다시 진행하도록 하겠습니다.